Chapter 13. Sometimes when you need things to get better, they just get worse. Of course, the next day I rush into school because I want to rescue my notebook before anyone finds it. Even though I have the key safe and sound around my neck, I don't want to risk anyone stealing it because, you see, it is the kind of thing that everybody would want, so it is tempting. The problem is, when I try to get around to the back playground, there is all this fencing stuff up, and that's when I remember Mr. Skipper's words. He said this would happen and the builders would come, so I have no chance. I will just have to wait, and maybe I will never see my ruby notebook ever again. Who knows? After lunch, things go even more wrong and something really bad happens. It all starts with Mrs. Wilburton saying, "I hope everyone has remembered to bring in their homework my weekend because we are going to go around the class reading them all out loud." When she is saying this, she all the time has her beady eyes on Carl Renbury. Carl is just sitting there with his arms folded, not even opening his bag. When Mrs. Wilburton gets to him, she says, "Chop, chop, Carl, let's get on with it." Carl says, "No." Mrs. Wilburton says, "What do you think makes you so special?" He says, "Nothing." Mrs. Wilburton says, "Well then, we will start with you." Carl says, "Well, I am not going to read anything because I didn't do it." Mrs. Wilburton says, "I sincerely hope I am hearing wrong because I seem to remember asking you in no uncertain terms to get it done." Carl says, "You can't make me write about my private stuff, and I'm not going to." Mrs. Wilburton says, "You will do what I tell you to do, young man." And Carl says, "I am not talking about my private business to you, so stop being such a nosy Parker. I hate you, and I hate this school." Then Carl goes completely demented and crazy and chucks all the things off his desk, and he throws his chair across the room, and he is screaming and screaming. And our class is all quiet, and Mrs. Wilburton goes very pale in the face and a bit shaky, and she says, "Now stop that at once, Carl," but she doesn't say it very loud because she looks sort of shocked. And Carl is pulling his own hair, and he just says over and over, "No one gets to know about my private stuff. No one. I decide who knows my stuff. It's my business, not yours." And Mrs. Wilburton is panicking and rushes out of the class and comes back in 1 minute with Mr. Washington. And Mr. Washington walks in all calmly, and he says, "Carl, hey, why don't we go outside?" And he just stops all the shouting just like that. And Carl looks at him and nods, and Mr. Washington says to Mrs. Wilburton, "I'll take it from here." And Mrs. Wilburton just nods because maybe she doesn't know what to say. And when they go out, no one says a word. A bit later, Mr. Pickering comes in and says, "Does anyone know what brought this on?" I don't say anything because I'm trying to keep my mouth shut, and although I know what has upset Carl Renbury, he told me not to tell, so I don't. But I sort of wish I had, because how can anyone help if nobody tells?